I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He is the author of Stevie novels, no other than Mr. Kalimaxos.
Good evening, Daniel.
Hello, Mr. Kali, and welcome back.
Glad to be
Another
here.
Yes, another week, another book that we're gonna talk about. So before we go on, let's do the recap of all the books that we talk about.
Okay. The first book we discussed was a book called My Decision. It's about a wife with a husband who's no longer interested in sex, and she has to decide what she's going to do with her life after she finds that out. The second series that we talked about, this is a series of books, is a total of eight. It's called Jane's Diaries. And the story is about a wife who passes away, and her diaries are discovered by her husband after. And he finds out that throughout their entire marriage, for decades, she was cheating on him with multiple lovers and behind his back. Uh, the third book that we discussed was the series called My Husband's Boss. And it is about a couple during bad times, economic times, who make a deal with the husband's boss that the wife is going to be his mistress, and the husband in return is going to get a good promotion that's going to make enough money to help him get through the bad times. And of course, there's a story with that. Uh, the fourth book we discussed was a book called Size Matters. It's a standalone book, and it has to do with multiple issues, but basically, it's about physical incompatibility in a marriage, size fixation, different sizes, and infidelity, and the need for some people who've been cheated on to get revenge. Um, so that's pretty much that story. And the next one we discussed last week was a series called Forbidden Lust. There's five books in the series. It's not finished yet. There's more to come. And this is the journey of a couple who decide that they still love each other, but their love life is kind of stale, and they decide that they want to spice it up with other people. And they go through all different types of experiences and adventures in the extramarital sex universe world. Um, and we come to this week, and the book we're going to discuss today is a little bit different. It's called Ignored by Omega. Uh,
Wow, Alpha and
yes,
Omega.
yes. And Omega is a virus, it's a zombie virus. It's my one and only attempt at sci-fi and zombies and stuff like that. But in typical fashion, there's people having relationships and, of course, steamy sex. But in this story, that aspect of it is sort of like the main part is the story of the zombies and what happens. Only it's not told from the top point of view, like a president or the doctors trying to figure it out and all that. It's still from the point of view of some people down in the trenches in real life who somehow end up getting caught up in this. Um, so that's what the book that we're going to discuss tonight.
Okay, so ignored by Omega. What behind the title of your book?
Well, as the words say, the two main parts: ignored and Omega. Omega is the virus, and the ignored part is that some people are immune to it. So the zombies are going around and attacking some people, but there's a few people that the zombies just look at them and just walk past. And that's who the main characters in this story are. There's an entire background story, which I love doing with characters. I like building them up, and so that the reader is vested in them. I want them to know these people, who and what they are, and you hear about their past and their life, and in typical fashion, they're very flawed people. They're not perfect. They especially the main character, Jack, who is the first point of view character, and he is not kind to himself. I mean, he's very self-deprecating. He he makes fun of himself at times, about how life is. And even though the story for him is kind of kind of rough. He um, so let's set up how the story begins. The story begins for Jack. He's married with a couple of kids. No, I think he has three, a boy and two girls, and they're living in El Paso, Texas. And him and his wife are having problems. As a matter of fact, he knows that his wife is cheating on him with one of the teachers of one of the kids, and he himself is kind of no better when he finds out that his wife is cheating on him. He wants to get even, so he hits on and has an affair with her best friend, like everyone does, I guess.
Yeah. Yes,
When they want to
everybody
get
does.
even. So we have to make the story a little juicy. Okay, so when the story starts, uh, that's where we find Jack. We find him. He's a 41-year-old man. He's a middle manager in a small factory. His career is kind of stalled. His wife is seeing somebody else, and he feels kind of like trapped, because he wants to be near his kids. And so he doesn't dump her. So all he does is he says, okay, she's going to have a boyfriend. I'm going to have a girlfriend, and I'm going to tough it out until our kids are grown. That's how, a lot of people end up doing that. Not everybody jumps on the divorce train and breaks up their families because of infidelity. And that's what these people do. And his wife, surprisingly, does kind of the same thing. Like she could easily dump him and take the kids and take the house and all that and throw him out, but she doesn't do that either. So that's where we find him in the beginning. And then all of a sudden, the virus outbreak begins, and they learn of it in the news. He goes home after he's been with his girlfriend, and his wife is, while the kids are playing, um, his wife is in the kitchen trying to hide the TV as he's looking at the news, and they see that there's this virus, and they kind of explain what's going on. That people they call it um, like a rabbit human rabies or something like that. At first, they don't have a name for it, but they know that it's transmitted by people attacking other people and that they go crazy, blah blah blah. And little by little, you see them watching the news, and they see a news report from Nepal, um, there's an area with a common border between India and China, and there's refugees coming out of China trying to get into India because they're running away from this thing. So, and then there is another report where an airplane full of people um, lands in Baghdad and in the Middle East, and apparently there was an outbreak on the plane, and for the first time they're watching the people that are infected attacking other people and how the military puts the infection down. In the end, they end up shooting everybody in the crowd because they know that everybody is infected. And they end up even shooting some of the soldiers that got bit. So this is the shock that they go through. And then they basically the next day he goes to work and there's more news that this thing has gotten out through flights and it international flights, and wherever there's an international airport these things have landed um, in Europe and on the East Coast and eventually on the West Coast, and where there are some international airports in the middle of the country like Chicago and Cincinnati where they get flights from Europe. Anyway, so the guy is at work. His wife calls him and says, I want to take some money out so we can buy stuff in case there's a run in the stores. And he says, go ahead. Um, she takes out $5,000 that they have in the bank, and he's worried that she's going to spend it all on, he doesn't know what he's doing, but he's trying to placate her and make sure that they stick together with this with the kids. And ev- eventually he goes home. When he goes home, the home is empty. The wife has left and left a note, which is a brutal note, basically telling him that she decided that uh, while this thing is coming, she's running away. She's going to her family, taking the kids, and going with her new man. And she tells Jack, "I married the wrong man. I need a better man that can better take care of me and the kids. And I don't want you in my life anymore. That's it." And Jack is obviously shocked. I mean, not only has he lost his marriage, his family, his children are the most important thing to him. So he starts looking at their bank records and credit cards, and he finds that his wife used one of the credit cards to buy airline tickets, not to Florida where her sister lives, that she told him, but where her boyfriend is from in Ohio. So the story now goes to Jack on a quest to track down his family, and um, he knows his marriage is over, but he wants to track down his kids, and he's talking on the phone to his girlfriend while he's in Chicago waiting for a connection flight, and she tells him like everything is safe here because of the military, and also the president of the United States is here now, so there's a lot more security. This is probably the safest place, so come back here with the kids. And he's like, first of all, I don't have the kids, and even then I'm on the other side of the country with a virus and and a plague in between, so I'll try and get there, but I don't know how. So those are his goals. But when he gets to Ohio, the virus is already there. And that's where the story gets deep and it gets dark. And I will tell you that this is a different book than books that I have written previously, because most of my other books are fun and nobody dies. Nobody, I don't like revenge stories. I don't like ugliness and all that. I keep my stories lighthearted for people to have entertainment. But this story is totally different because let's face it, if something like that were to happen, it would not be pretty. People would be dying left and right. And that's what happens in this story. Some major characters die. And Jack is left to deal with the fact that, his family is practically gone to him because of this. Starts over with another woman who she was the sister of the guy that his wife ran off with. And as the events unfold and the zombies are killing people, these two are not dying. Even though they got bit by the zombies, they survive and they both know that they got bit, but they're still alive. And hours later, they're still alive. And eventually they get to some sort of safety. Um, and That's when this part of the second part of the story begins with these two people and how they deal with living in a zombie apocalypse where society is kind of collapsing. Not exactly like you see in some of these other stories where there is no government and there is no internet, there is no phones, there's no nothing. A lot of the technology is still around, and there's the government is still around. It's trying to fight this thing, but they've lost a lot of people, close to 100 million. So that's pretty much the setup of the story. And obviously I don't want to go, I've given up a lot, but there's a lot in between the lines in this story and then what happens afterwards. Um, so that's where we're at.
How did you crafted the book, Mr. Kelly?
The book is pretty much told from the point of view of one character, um, and his experiences. It's a first person, point of view. I believe it or not, I started this book years before COVID happened. Um, I don't know. There was a lot of stories back then about, we had all these zombie shows on TV and all this, and I thought that the stories were pretty lame. I mean, anytime I watch TV, I criticize the writing. It's my wife knows it by now, and she's doing it too. We'll look at each other while we're watching a TV show and go, "Oh, good God, the story's weak," or something to that effect. And I decided to write my own version and put a little spice to it and give it a little different spin. Something that I hadn't seen before. A story of kind of like immunity. But it's not an immunity that the doctors figure out in a lab, the heroic doctor who finds out what happened. No, this is natural. These people are just like out in, amongst the zombies, and little by little they realize that the zombies are not going after them and they're ignoring them. So that was my intent. I wanted to do something in the genre of zombies and have normal people involved, throw in a little romance, a little betrayal, a little infidelity, all the things that you put them all together and you make a juicy story. Uh, so that's where it went, and it has a little bit of humor in it too, so that it's not like all gloom and doom. Um, so that's pretty much the feel of the story.
So, Mr. Kelly, before we go on, I want to shout out to my top 10 ranking of the last 30 days according to Apple chart. And at number one, spot Algeria. Okay, at number 9 on the Apple chart, Cameroon at number 11, Jordan at number 17, United Arab Emirates at 109, Canada at 111, Hong Kong at 142, Georgia at 150, South Africa at 150, Mexico at 159, and Uganda 221. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. Kalimaxos. So, Mr. Kali, what is the best highlight of by
Ignore
Omega?
by Omega.
Yes.
Um, well, you could there's dark highlights where the guy loses his family and the woman. There are, but there's also happy ones where they find each other and they also find the dog that they adopt. Um, um, but the key to me is the human ability to survive adversity. Um, and here I had a little bit of help, I have to say. Many years ago, when I was a teenager, I read and I wish I could remember because it was such a good story. It was a World War II story about these people who, I mean, I forget where they lived, but it was in one of the countries that was occupied by the Germans, and they went through all these terrible things. People in their family were killed, and I mean, all kinds of stuff. And the the key part of the story was that these people were survivors. No matter what they went through, the husband was a soldier, and then he was a prisoner of war. Then he escaped, and he was with the guerrillas, and he was trying to get home, and then he was trapped in the east, on the eastern side of Germany, and he had to get back to uh, that's right. They were from Belgium, so he's trying to get back to Belgium, where his family is. Meanwhile, the wife is trying to keep her family together, the kids, and all that. So I found that these people were survivors, and I've always, I said to myself, there was a line in the book about how no matter how hard things get, people adopt and get through. And I remember talking to one of the people in my family who had been through World War II, my grandmother, and she said, "Oh yeah, we went through terrible things, but she said, even during the terrible things, we found time to laugh, um, and it wasn't like one terrible thing after another. She said it was, we had moments of bad, but there was also moments of normal and moments of good that got us through it. And I wanted to put some of that in this story because these people, they both lose their families. In the end, by the time it's over, all they have is each other because they're the only ones that are immune from this. So they're they're coping with the anger of what happened. That they lost so many people in their life, and all this adversity, and yet they find um, in each other. There is a tomorrow. They find out that even with all this stuff, there's a tomorrow. Um, so and there's so many human beings that go through all these things. I mean, we're seeing right now what's going on to people in Ukraine. and the things that they're going through. Families broken up. The wife and kids are refugees in Europe while the husband is still fighting in the war. People getting killed, maimed, all this stuff, and it's sort of like a little World War II going on right there to remind us that the world is not perfect, it's not safe, and bad things can happen. But human beings can rise above it, if they want, and if they the there is a part in the book where the main character talks about the people that survived, um, this event, the 3 years of hell. And he talks about people who were stuck in normal life, and when adversity came, they couldn't cope, they couldn't handle it. They were, they kept thinking, like he talks about people, whose car broke down on the side of the road, and instead of moving on, to try to get away from the danger, and hiding, they just sat there waiting for somebody to come and help them. And basically, what happened was the zombies showed up and killed them. Um, Whereas the survivors, they see a danger, the hair in the back of their neck stand, and they act on it. The the reaction of human beings, the people that make it through are the ones who, they rise to the moment. And if we look at human history through from ancient times until today, and probably in our future, because just when we think that everything is fine, something happens, and we're like, oh my God, 9/11 happened, and now this, oh my God, there's the war, and who knows what's going to happen, down the road. Um, so how humans how humans behave, how they think, was one of the important aspects of this story for me. I wanted to portray it. I wanted to show that, Jack and Ingrid, they were not your people that would sit by the side of the road waiting to be rescued. Even when eventually the government, finds out about them and wants to send people to help, um, they don't trust them. They're like, oh, you want to see what our blood is made out of, so that you can make a virus or whatever, but that's all you're gonna get. You're not gonna own us. They're take charge of their life type of people, and those are the people that are the survivors. Um, so that's the part that I putting that in the story was like the best part for me.
So, Mr. Kali, if you want to revise the book, which part of the book you want to revise?
Uh, I, it's a compact little story. Like stories should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it has all of that. Um, if so, I think I might have now, thinking back on it, because it's kind of late after you write it. It would have been better if, instead of having it from the, uh, one person point of view, the main character's point of view, if it was more like third person, where I was describing these two people, and she was more equal, that he doesn't run into her, but you see her before, like when she's by herself in living her life in Ohio, and then the two of them end up coming together. I thought about that. But you know what? Stories are the way you write them. And like I was telling you, last week, I have this thing where I usually trust my instincts when I first start a story as to how I'm going to develop it, and what my characters are going to be like, and they've never failed me. So the story plays well when you read it. But in if I had the only thing that I think that I would have done different, I would have done that, make it a third person so that I can have like, with third person, you can introduce to the character different places. It's not what the main character hears and experiences. It's also like what other people are doing elsewhere in other places and how the story comes together. But when you do that, you also miss on that flavor of putting the reader in the shoes of one person. Um, so while I would wonder what it'd be like to write a similar story from third person, I'm kind of glad that I wrote this one the way that I did, um, because you start to like Jack, and what he's going through and how he thinks. He's not perfect and he knows it. So that would be the only thing.
Are you the writer, Mr. Kali, that it easy for you to name your characters?
Um, naming characters, I got to tell you something. I keep it as simple as possible. I've made a mistake of reusing names in a couple of stories, and I didn't realize because I like to use like common names like Jack and John and stuff like that, and um, common female names also. And so I think I need to be a little bit more careful that I don't double up. And I have one story with the name of the main female character, and then in another book I have the same name. But mainly, I like to keep it simple. I don't like using like strange, weird names, um, because the readers, you got to look at your readers and you got to say, okay, who am I writing for? I'm writing English, which means it's basically going to be read in the American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, and English world. Those are going to be your main people. So make the names of these people sound from that culture. I mean, if I was writing, in French, obviously, I would need French names and all that, but I don't write French because, I know a few words, but not the language. But if whoever your customer is, in the end, your reader, you need to give him names of people and individuals that match his world so he can or she can identify with them easier. um, I mean, unless the story calls for somebody with a foreign name because there's like a foreign national in this culture and there's a reason why he's there. The He's being different and having a strange name is is an integral part of the story. But most of the time, I got to tell you, there's you can go on the internet and find common names, and that's usually what I do. I don't go. It's rare that I have like strange names for people.
Very well said, Mr. Kali. So, are you the writer that you gonna plan first and then go to the depth of the story?
Well, I occasionally, in some stories, I have flashbacks when needed. But most of my stories are usually, I mean, most of my stories are there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a flow to it. Occasionally, you need to do a flashback. You need to go back and explain. And in this story, I had to do that when he meets um, Ingrid, the second character in the story, his leading lady. And eventually she'll tell him her background and her story. And the only way that, when you're doing a first person story is if the other person narrates her past. You can't do it in third person when you're writing a first person story. It's got to be done through dialogue. So I have no choice but to go back. Um, I've had a complaint or two from some of my readers who, for some reason, having flashbacks bothers them. I don't know why. I find that an interesting aspect and tool in a story, but some of them don't like it. But the thing is, they're not writing my story. I am. And like I said, I trust my instincts. And if they tell me that I should do something like that, usually I do it for a reason. There's a setup, and then if I have to go back to something, then I do it. If not, I don't. Depending on the story, it's always depending on the story and the characters and what's going on.
Wow. Very well said, Mr. Kelly. So before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, in our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the executive chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen. Food 101. Plus one more, I have a new podcast coming this June. Comedy 101 with one of the best comedian of all time, Mr. Mike Lucas. So please do listen. Comedy 101. So, Mr. Kali, as an indie author, what are your aspiring message for those, or inspiring message for those aspiring writers out there?
Um, there's two ways that you can write. You can write what you think people want to read so that you can sell and make money. Or you can write what is from inside you, your ideas, if you have stories that are in your head and they need to get out. And I do that most of the time. I have not written, obviously, I don't have anything huge that has made me rich. Um, but I write stories based on ideas I have, and I say, this needs to be written. And I would suggest to writers that if you do this, um, a gem that is in your head may come out, surprise you, and become a success. Now, you probably have to present it and push it and, not give up about trying to get it published or advertising it, whatever you got to do. I mean, that's another aspect of writing, selling yourself. Because many of us writers, we write stuff and it goes nowhere because we're not adept in promoting and selling ourselves. But you can copy, like I said, if you decide that you want to do and say, oh, this is what's selling, I need to do this. Like, you remember you asked me in one of the earlier shows, are your stories anything close to 50 Shades of Grey?
Yes.
And I said no, because the, the, I it's already been done, in my view. To do another 50 Shades of Grey, the readers will see through that and go, oh yeah, okay, well, if I want to read that, I'll read 50 Shades. Okay. Or I try to do things that are a little bit different. And even though some of my stuff is similar, because let's face it, I mean, I write books about human sexuality, extramarital sex, sex of all different types, and all that. So there's just so many that areas that you can, I mean, you take a piece of paper and in one page you can pretty much write the main and have room left over the main types of sexuality and genres that people travel in their sex life. Um, but what makes and then you have a lot of these stories where people just throw that at a piece of paper. It's like they have a canned story, and all they do is pretty much, I mean, when you read it, you think that you've read the story before. The only difference is the names, the places, where they work and what profession they have. But the story is like similar to another story because it is the same story. I try to go more in depth instead of, the whole story being sexual. I try to have like the characters be what's different. The situation, the like I was telling you in a previous show, it's the life of people that they're living, and part of that life is their sex life. There's some writers who will write these stories about people, and the sex part is like 10 lines through like three books. Like they'll write a War and Peace size book, and these people go through all kinds of stuff in their life, epic and all this stuff. The sex is basically a few spots here and there, and it's implied, or if it's discussed, it's so clinical. It's so like, and then we did this, and oh boy, then it was the next morning we're having breakfast. I don't do that. I include more of it. There's actual parts where there's sex described, but that's not the main part of my story. There's people stories behind that. I, to give you an example, I'm writing a story right now. I'm like almost 30,000 words into it, and it is probably the most sexual story that I have written. It has the most sex in it. Uh, but it's not just about that. It's about these three. So I'm writing the story, and it's about these three people during the pandemic, and they're stuck together. They're young people. They're, in their prime. And of course, it turns into a story about the sex between these three. But even though it's about that, I try real hard to put in like a background about these people. And as I'm editing some of these chapters, and because I that's another thing I do sometimes is I edit as at the same time as I write. I go back and forth, and I say, no, that part is weak. That needs more character development. That is, and it ends up being a non-sexual part, but it's important because you need that so that the reader can identify with these people. Because other than that, I mean, if you just want a story about people having sex, you might as well just rent a video and watch that. And these people are total strangers, and you get to see the sex, and okay, there you go. That's it. There's some people on Medium on online that write stories like that. They're canned. They're pretty much the same thing over and over. If you don't have development, you don't have, in my mind, you don't have a story. That was the point that I had to make about that. I mean,
What are the pros and cons of indie publishing?
indie publishing is not for the faint of heart. You don't have the support of um, obviously a publishing house with their editors, and but at the same time, you don't have people telling you what to write. I write my own stories. Nobody tells me you should write this or you should write that. I've had a few people that I know, fans, who have tried that with me, and it doesn't work because in my stories, I write the story. That's what I'm there for. That's my job. My job is to be the guy who writes the story. If you work for a publishing house, you're their slave. I've talked to a gentleman out of England who has written some books. I think he's like up to 10 books that have been bestsellers. And he has had to change publishers a couple of times because they interfere in his writing. You should do this, you should write that, rewrite this and rewrite that. And in the end, he says they're not your story. Um, he also told me the same thing about if you sell one of your stories to be made into a TV show or movie. He said, if you, with those people, he said, there is no control as a writer. You just need to get it through your head that you're basically selling them a concept story, and then they're going to take it, and Lord knows what they're going to do with it. But when you're an indie author, that's the pleasure of it, that you are in control. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to be your team. You got to be the one who does the artwork for your cover. You got to be the one who does the editing. You become your own beta reader. You find tricks to be able to fix and catch mistakes. And here's the part that is sad, that you have these self-imposed deadlines. I got to do a book a month, or I got to do more than one, or whatever. And the deadline comes close, and you haven't done the multiple passes of editing that you should do to get the finished product to be right. Because in editing, it's not just catching the grammar mistakes, it's also doing some rewrites. And that takes time. So if you start a story, and, like in with some of us indie writers, if you don't publish once a month, you're kind of left in the dust, especially in the genre that I'm in. You know, and you notice it in your sales, because people expect to see something from you, and if you don't have at least one a month, so what you're doing is you're struggling to write it, then edit it, rewrite it, and figure out, am I done? Am I ready? And eventually you end up pulling the trigger sometimes, when you haven't finished all of it. But you can sit on a story, you can sit on a book, um, you know, and it can never be finished because you're constantly tweaking it. I've talked to a couple of writers who have that problem. There's one, he has a book that he finished 3 years ago, and he can't bring himself to publish it, to self-publish it. Even though I told him, I said, you know what? You might be surprised how many people will buy your book if you just put it up on Amazon. And if you see a mistake, or if you want to change it a little bit, here's a thought. Amazon allows you to edit your own book and update the copy. And he's like, oh, I could never do that, because then people would see that he's too obsessed with what people would think rather than what he's writing. And
Yes.
so that's my take.
Okay, Mr. Kelly, can you invite our listeners to buy all your books?
Well, my books are different than other people's because of the way that I write them. There is a they fall under the erotica genre because there's sex in them. But sex is not the preeminent aspect of this story. Uh, it's the story that and the characters, the plot line, the conversations they have with them, between them, the interactions that are the what makes them different. So if you want to, like I said before, if you're interested in just the sex aspect of stories, you can just skip to that part in my books, and they're pretty good. They're very descriptive and illicit and steamy in their own right. But you'd be missing out the best part, which is the the psychosexual aspect, as I call it, where these people are doing things that they have to, in their mind, cross over barriers. Society has barriers on us, but these characters have to overcome them, and they think them through what it is to be them, and the thought process that they have. And that, to me, is the key aspect of it, because it, some of the things that these people do are not your normal standard, marriage relationship. You can get that anyway. uh, but that's the thing that I focus. You find in my stories good character development and a decent story, that ties everything together.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Kali, for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.
Is that the last book you have, or you have more books to come?
I have more. Uh, they are, but I have some books that we need to discuss that are a little bit different, than others. The book called Presents, or Christmas Presents, I'm planning on renaming it to just Presents. Um, and then there is a two series that I have, and those are kind of interesting in the erotic world, because they relate to the whole wife sharing, hot wife cuckold aspect. One is told from the point of view the of the couple mainly, but then I have another one that is told from the point of view of the mentor and lover of the wife. He basically finds this couple that are interested, but because they have kids, he doesn't want them to screw it up and ruin their life. So those are the two books series that I've written, and I'm still in the process of finishing them. The one is in two parts, and the other one is in four. And there'll be more books.
Okay, Mr. Kali, thank you for your time. Moricon people, see you soon.